Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into the source material behind one of the most shocking events in modern history, the U.S. military operation that ended with the capture of a sitting head of state. On January 3, 2026, this is the message that pretty much jolted the entire world awake. Can you imagine waking up to that? An official announcement, right there on social media, confirming that the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, was in U.S. military custody. It was just a stunning end to a wild night of chaos in the skies over Caracas. So, how did this all happen? To get our heads around it, let's look at the operation itself. It was a meticulously planned mission that the Pentagon codenamed Absolute Resolve. And this whole thing happened incredibly fast. Think about the timeline. President Trump gives the final go-ahead just before 11 p.m. Eastern. A few hours later, airstrikes are hitting targets, and by 3:29 a.m., Maduro is on a U.S. plane. It was an absolute whirlwind. And this is a key point. It was all done without any prior notification to the U.S. Congress. The sheer scale of this was just immense. You're talking about over 150 aircraft in the sky, F-22s, B-1 bombers, the whole shebang. They were there to provide air cover and, crucially, to knock out Venezuela's air defenses. This overwhelming show of force basically cleared a path for a surgical strike by the Army's elite Delta Force, flown in by the legendary Night Stalkers to grab Maduro and his wife. So what was the official reason for such an extraordinary action? Well, the administration was very careful not to frame this as an act of war. They called it something else entirely.
The whole public justification really hinges on a 2020 federal indictment from New York, and the charges are heavy: narcoterrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, weapons possession. The U.S. accused Maduro of being the leader of a drug trafficking group they called the Cartel of the Suns. Now, this wasn't out of the blue. You had earlier actions like designating Venezuelan gangs as terrorists and, get this, a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head. So in the eyes of the U.S. government, this was just law enforcement going after a very wanted fugitive.
And this quote from Attorney General Pam Bondi really nails down the administration's public stance. She announced Maduro would be flown to New York to face these charges in federal court. So you see, they weren't treating him as a captured head of state, but as just another criminal defendant. Okay, so that's the official story. But let's peel back the layers here. Because when you dig into the analysis of the source material, it points to three powerful, interconnected strategic drivers that tell a much bigger story about geopolitics, money, and power.
Yeah, this was never just about one guy. The real motivation seemed to go much deeper, painting a really fascinating picture of American foreign policy in the 21st century.
The analysis really boils it down to these three core drivers. Number one, get control of Venezuela's unbelievable oil reserves. Number two, push back against China's growing influence in America's backyard. And number three, bring back a 200-year-old piece of U.S. foreign policy known as the Monroe Doctrine. Let's start with the black oil.
So here's the kicker. Venezuela is sitting on top of the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet. That's right, even more than Saudi Arabia. And not just any oil. Its heavy crude is supposedly a perfect match for the specialized refineries we have right here on the U.S. Gulf Coast. The thinking was that securing this supply could help lower gas prices for Americans.
And that oil brings us straight to the second driver, China. See, after U.S. sanctions created a vacuum, China jumped in and became Venezuela's #1 economic partner. By 2023, a staggering 68% of Venezuela's oil was headed to China, all part of deals to pay back nearly $50 billion in loans. So this operation? It's like cutting a critical economic artery for both of them.
This all leads us to the historical justification for the whole thing, the revival of the Monroe Doctrine. This is a foundational, almost 200-year-old idea in U.S. foreign policy. To put it simply, it says the Western Hemisphere is America's backyard, and other global powers need to stay out. The modern goal here was to deny strategic resources in the region to rivals, specifically China. And President Trump was not subtle about this at all. He explicitly said the action was an application of what he personally called the Monroe Doctrine, declaring that U.S. dominance in its own hemisphere would, quote, never be questioned again.
So an operation this big is obviously going to have some fallout, right? And boy, did it ever. This move sent shockwaves across the globe, and the world was immediately and deeply divided on what it all meant.
Here at home, the reaction split right down party lines. You had supporters, like Representative Lisa McClain, who praised it as decisive leadership against a narco-terrorist. Then you had critics, like Senator Ruben Gallego, who flat out called it an illegal war. It instantly kicked off this fierce constitutional debate about presidential war power.
Internationally, the condemnation from many corners was swift and harsh. Commentators were comparing it to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling it a violation of the UN Charter. Human rights groups were denouncing the unilateral use of force. The broader fear that you see repeated in the analysis is that this sets a dangerous precedent, that it marks a shift away from a world of international law to a world of, well, might makes right.
And in Venezuela itself, the government that was left was defiant. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez declared a state of external commotion, and she vowed to resist what she called a kidnapping and a foreign invasion. She was even demanding proof of life for Maduro, as the country tried to figure out what to do next.
Ultimately, the events of January 3rd leave us all with a huge critical question. Does this mark a bold new era of American foreign policy? Or is it a dangerous return to a time of unilateral intervention, one that risks tearing down the very idea of international law? That's the question the world is now forced to confront.